Our reading this morning is from John 15, verses 1 through 8, and you can find this on page 109 in the New Testament if you'd like to follow along. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. The word of the Lord.
Our gospel passage for today that Sally just read to us is the last of what are called the I am sayings in John. Jesus connects himself and God's ministry with various things throughout the Gospel of John in a series of statements called the I am statements. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. Recall that from last week. Kate preached on the good shepherd, Jesus saying, I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And as we have just heard, I am the true vine. Recall that this I am language harkens back to Moses' encounter with God and the burning bush, when God self-identified as I am who I am. In Exodus 3, God said to Moses, God said this, thus you shall say to the Israelites, Moses, I am has sent me to you. In other words, the phrase I am refers in the Torah to God. And so these I am metaphors in John's gospel identified Jesus as God. Upon hearing Jesus say, I am this or I am that, Jesus' Hebrew listeners would have readily made this connection to the Torah, to Exodus. Each time Jesus says, I am, he claims Yahweh's name and authority. Each time Jesus says, I am, he connects himself to some of the most treasured concepts in Israel. In the Torah, Yahweh had given the Hebrews manna from heaven. But now Jesus claims he is that manna. Jesus is the bread of life. Israel had thought that being the chosen nation, the one and only beacon in the world, was their calling, but now Jesus tells them he has taken that calling onto himself. Jesus is the light of the world. In the Hebrew poetry, it's written, the Lord is my shepherd. But now Jesus claims to be the shepherd of Israel. He says, I am the good shepherd. The prophet writes how God reanimates the dry bones of Ezekiel's vision, and God is the source of life. But here Jesus takes that claim onto himself. He says, he is the life for the people. I am the resurrection and the life. And in the passage we just heard read, the last I am statement, Jesus claims the language of the vineyard, the language of the vine and vineyard is everywhere in the prophets and writings. It's found in Isaiah and Jeremiah, in Hosea, in Psalms. The vine was a common image for the people of Israel. And so when Jesus says, "I am the true vine," his listeners would have been quick to make the connection that Jesus is the new Israel, the one through whom God was establishing a new covenant. In our gospel lesson, Jesus is the vine, and the fruit-bearing branches are the disciples. The branches are those who follow Jesus, those who listen to Jesus. God is the overseer of the vineyard. God is the one who cultivates the vineyard. I lived in Strasbourg, France for a year during college. Strasbourg is on the eastern side of France in the region of Alsace. And running through the center of Alsace, north to south, is called Le Route du Vin, or the Wine Road. There are delicious Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris grapes that are cultivated in that part of France. And the producers in Alsace are really proud of their fine fruit, of these grapes, and of their wines. I wanted to participate in a vendage when I was living there. This is what grape picking season is called in France. But I had schoolwork, and the French family I was living with didn't think it was a good idea, so I didn't. But I did celebrate with everyone else when the Beaujolais Nouveau appeared. This was a big deal in Alsace. The first wine from the first grapes was on the shelves, and there was a big celebration. I learned a little bit about grapes and wines when I lived just off the Wine Road in Strasbourg, and I know many of you know a lot more about grapes and wines than I do. It's a fascinating study. One thing I did learn is that the strongest place on a grapevine is where the branches are attached to the vine. Recall from our passage, Jesus is the vine. We are the branches. And so if we translate this to our metaphor for today, this means we don't need to worry that our connection to Jesus will be broken. At least not from Christ's side. That connection is powerful. It's strong. Jesus says, if you want to find life, abide in me. Be connected to me. I will never leave you or forsake you. Where you and I are connected, that's the strongest place on the vine. Jesus also says, those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. The overwhelming thrust of this passage is about fruitfulness. The words bear fruit appear 6 times in these 8 verses. Fruit bearing is not something the branches do by force or by will. The fruit happens organically because the vine is true and the gardener good. The commentators I've read suggest that the New Testament doesn't give us a specific meaning for fruitfulness, for the word fruit. But by reading the Gospel of John, we know that fruit is symbolic of the love of Christ, the attitudes of Christ, the actions of Christ. In Galatians 5, we read about fruits of the Spirit. The fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. This vine, to which we, the branches, are strongly connected, is supposed to bear fruit. So what kind of fruit is it bearing? We ask this question of the branches, of you and me. We're the branches. What kind of fruit are you and I bearing for the beloved vine, for Jesus? This past Tuesday, on my drive to church, I was listening to the BBC radio, and I heard 3 different news reports, one right after the other, that were just devastating. depleting. They were depressing. The first news story was about the magnitude of the earthquake in Nepal and all of the aftershocks. 4,500 people were confirmed dead at that time, with the thinking that the number would at least double over the next few days. The second was a report about a new book that was being released that detailed the experiences of the girls who were kidnapped and held in captivity in Cleveland and their dire ordeal over the years they were forced to live in that horrific situation. And then the third report was about the rioting in Baltimore and the destruction of the newly built senior center and the looting of convenience stores and overall unrest and powder keg-like atmosphere in our neighboring city. It was all I could do to go to staff meeting not completely defeated and depressed about the state of affairs in our nation, in our world. How do you and I bear fruit when we are feeling so defeated and depressed about a situation or multiple situations? I imagine I'm not alone in feeling this way about news events or even events in our own lives that we face directly. I know some of you are dealing with grief and the recent deep sorrow of losing a parent or a spouse. I know some of you are facing illnesses and serious medical diagnoses that leave room for questions about what the near future holds. What does our passage say to us about the dire and difficult situations we find ourselves in today, in the state of our world? Bear fruit? Fruit bearing is not something the branches do by force of will. The fruit happens organically because the vine is true and the gardener good. However, the branches in this passage do abide. Jesus says, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish and it will be done to you. Jesus says, those who abide in me and I in them will bear much fruit. So perhaps the favorite fruit comes when we abide in him. That is, when we stay connected to Jesus in meaningful and tangible ways. Perhaps this means through prayer and study, through fellowship and service, we can indeed bear fruit, visible fruit, abundant fruit. In response to the 3 stories I heard Tuesday morning, not long after being so depressed, I received fruitful images and language to counter that desperation and fear. I wonder if this has happened to you as well. First, in response to the Nepalese earthquake, the next day, I came across an image of a young, maybe 6-month-old baby being dug out of the rubble, rock by rock, hand by hand. And the baby was alive, wiping his eyes, wondering what was going on. Maybe some of you saw that image as well. This was for me, and I imagine for those who saw that image, a sign of life in the midst of the ash and the death and the destruction. Fruit. Second, when thinking about the girls in Cleveland, I thought of the Good Samaritan passerby who did call 911 when he saw what he perceived as a desperate situation. It was that Good Samaritan's call to 911 that led to the girls' ultimate release and reunion with their families. Fruitful action. Third, when thinking about the Baltimore situation, I came across the image of a young boy, he couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, giving water to the National Guard. I think one of you sent me this image. He was giving water to the peacekeeping force in Baltimore as a way to help. And also, I committed to participating in a prayer vigil for Baltimore with friends across the country. So I've committed to praying an hour a day for a week for the people of Baltimore. Fruit? Jesus knows the pressures that you and I face. He knows the desperate state of affairs in our world, in our country, in our lives. And that's why he says, remain in me, abide in me, stay close to me, align your life with me. Jesus says, those who remain in him will bear much fruit. Here at this table, we abide in Christ. Here at this table, we remain with Christ as we taste of the fruit of the vine and as we eat of the bread of life. We're then sent out into a world in need of fresh fruit. We are sent out then to share favorite fruit, abundant fruit, so that others can celebrate that delicious hope that comes from the new wine that is poured out for all. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Thanks be to God. Amen.